Nioh 2 is certainly not an easy game, which will punish you even for the most minor mistakes. This can however be counteracted by throwing together a decent build for your character. The build options in Nioh 2 are extremely vast and you'll find hundreds of videos explaining how to optimize a specific build for maximum damage. These builds are however often geared at later stages in the game and require a lot of farming to get all the pieces needed. With this video I intend to show you how to start free builds in the early game, which is also viable well into New Game Plus, which you can throw together quickly with minimal grinding. Note that these builds are only possible after getting to the second area of the game and after beating the boss of the third main mission. If you're struggling with the early missions or the game in general, I recommend checking out my beginner's guide, which addresses just that along with some general tips. The three builds I will cover are Poison, Magic and Ninjutsu builds. Do not view these as set in stone, but more like an open-ended start to make your own build. I've kept them quite general so you can try to tune them to suit your preferred playstyle. If you only find one of these types of builds interesting, I will leave some timestamps in the description of the video. The first build I would like to cover is the Poison build. This is probably the most versatile build I can recommend, since it will function with any weapon of your choice and it will still require you to master the combat of Nioh. The base of the build is to deal increased damage to enemies inflicted by poison, which is a status effect which almost all enemies are susceptible to. The combat plays out very simple. Throw a poison shuriken at your enemy, and if you have some poison accumulation on your gear and soul cores, a single throw should do the trick. Then you just wail on them, and now you're doing approximately 60% extra damage. There are a couple of options for inflicting poison. My usual go-to method is, as I mentioned, the poison shuriken, which, if you make the build as I suggest, will almost always inflict poison with a single throw. Other options are the blister beetle powder, which allows you to throw a poisonous cloud, and the other is the gallnut broth, which allows you to coat your weapons in poison. However, these are a little more finicky to use and mostly the shurikens will be more than enough. Finally, you can also get passive poison damage on your weapon. This is not as good as you might think and will not be super effective in this build, since you have to hit the enemy multiple times before the poison is applied. It is fine for maintaining poison status on an enemy in a long fight, for example a boss fight, but do not rely on it in general to apply the effect. Remember that the poison has to be fully applied before you get your damage bonus. For gearing, the idea here is to get the stat plus melee damage to poisoned enemy on as many pieces of gear as possible. First up, by beating the third main mission, you will have gotten access to the Yatsu no Kami soul core, which has this effect. It also doubles as a very good yokai skill which can decimate enemies with ease, and I recommend it for any first build. Next up, you need accessories with this buff. You can roll these by tempering with Umbracite at the blacksmith, which you can obtain by dismantling gear. While melee damage to poisoned enemy is the most important, also look for things that give you poison accumulation, which will help you apply the poison effect to your foe quicker. You can get this in both accessories and weapons. You can also grab a toxic slime soul core from the blobs outside the Yatsu no Kami boss fight in the third main mission, which has this effect natively. Also, if you like using the brute guardian spirits, then the third mission gives you a snake guardian which will boost poison accumulation as well. In general, having 3 or 4 sources of poison accumulation is perfect, and that is basically it for the gear, and you can use any weapon you like for this. Regarding stats, have between 10 and 15 points of dexterity. Other than that, dump mostly everything into the stats which your weapon scale with. For ninjutsu skills, you basically only need the poison shurikens I mentioned, but I usually carry a single gallnut broth for boss fights. From there, you can pick utilities and buffs that you like. For example, the quick change scroll is a great way to get out of a nasty situation by reviving you if you run out of health. There is also a passive bonus to poison damage, but note that this refers to damage recurrently dealt by the poison effect and not your melee damage, which is what we're going for with this build. It is however still fine if you have some spare skill points. When it comes to armor, you can basically pick whatever you like. There are some really good early general sets like the Yokai Annihilator and Slayer sets, for which you can get the smithing text quite easily. You just have to farm the masked men out in mission 2 and 3, where you can find some of them very close to a shrine in each level. You can also just use whatever you find on the floor, but just watch your equip load. There is one final upgrade for this build which you can grind for, but it is annoying as hell to get, especially in the early game. In the mission called Bird in a Cage, you will find a special guy in a cave. He's called Dongman. Well, he might have a real name, but I have no intention of finding out. He's hungry and would like, well, poop. You can get dung balls from the bird monk things in these levels, and if you give him 30, he will give you a smithing text for something called the Snake Coil Helmet, which is the only piece of armor in the game with this plus melee damage to poisoned enemy. This one, however, takes a long time to grind for at an early level and is, in my opinion, not worth it, but if you're really bored, you can go for it. And that's basically it for setting up a poison build. It is easy to set up and is fun to play with, and you will still be able to kick some serious ass. I highly recommend going for this route. The second build I would like to talk about is the magic build. Here you're a lot more constricted with your choice of weapons, since the switchblade should be your go-to weapon, but you can also do it with a split staff. There is however some choice in how you want to approach a fight. Firstly, I would like to cover the magical effects that you can apply with this build. First we have lightning, which inflicts the electrify status, which will slow your enemy. Water will inflict the saturation effect, which will lower the enemy's armor, making you inflict more damage. It is hard to gauge exactly how much damage it increases, since it varies from enemy to enemy, but the general consensus is that it's an increase of between 10 and 20%. Lastly we have fire, which, well, burns. The fire status is just a damage over time effect, and I believe this to be the weakest of the three elements. There's also the purified and corrupted status effects, which are a bit special, but both increase the amount of ki damage that the enemy takes. This is however not used in the magic build I am proposing. The last effect you need to know about is confusion. This triggers as soon as you apply two of the mentioned status effects at the same time, but do note that poison will not count towards this. When the enemy is confused, they will take massively increased damage. This is great to use in a magic build, since you can actually apply this with ease. For the magic build you can go two routes: full on spell slinging, or you can take a much more melee based approach. For full on spell casting, go for the elemental shot spells fire, lightning and water, and go for a gear with plus Omnio magic power and unlimited Omnio. Omnio magic power increases your damage, while the unlimited Omnio gives you a chance of extra cast. With this you can carry around 36 total cast of the shots, which may be complete overkill even if you mix in just a little bit of melee combat. You can also substitute for some of the higher tier spells like Explosion Shot, but note that they require high capacity and may limit you if you want to carry buffs as well. For gear, there aren't really any amazing sets you can use during your first playthrough, so just go with whatever you like. If you like a more melee based approach, you can sort of do the same thing as we did with the poison build. You can get pieces of gear with plus melee damage to a certain element, such as lightning, but unfortunately you cannot roll this on accessories as you can with poison, so you will have to get it from certain set items. Here I would recommend going for lightning, both because slowing the enemy is great, and there are also a selection of both gear sets and guardian spirits which can give you bonuses to lightning attacks. For example, the Master Archer set, which you can get from the 4th main mission, and the secondary mission you unlock right after that gives you quick access to the boss. Note however, in order to grab the smithing text for this set, you may have to kill this stupid boss many times. The set does however grant you plus 20% melee damage to electrified enemies, which is just fantastic. You should also note that this set is unfortunately quite heavy. As I said, for both types of magic build, the switchblade should be a go-to weapon, but the split staff can also be used. Although this has slightly worse scaling with the magic stat where you will be dumping most of your points. That's basically it for a magic build. The fights will play out by you either using your shots to apply some status effects, or maybe using some talismans to engorge your weapon in flame or whatever. And then you will simply start wailing on him or shoot more magic. It is quite easy to play like this, and I find it a lot more fun than the next build I would like to talk about. Finally, I would like to cover a Ninjutsu build, and this is basically easy mode. It will cause massive damage with your throwing knives, and the Storm Kunai is basically a shotgun which will decimate bosses. This is a build I wouldn't recommend, even though it's the easiest to play for your first playthrough, and this is for two reasons. One, you will not familiarize yourself with the combat, and will have put yourself at a huge disadvantage if you ever choose to change to a different build. 2. The build is extremely easy to gear for, but as soon as you hit New Game Plus and on, gearing becomes quite the chore in order to actually remain competitive with something like the other builds I've talked about. The idea of the build is basically that you want plus shuriken and kunai damage to all of your accessories and on as much gear as possible. After the third mission, you can craft something called the Fume Ninja Gear, which has the stat natively, and then you can roll the shuriken and kunai damage on your accessories. And once you've crafted this, you're basically done. Put your skill points into kunais and storm kunais and dump as many points into dexterity as you can, and you're good to go. You can also try to go for some unlimited ninjutsu on your accessories and armor for more throwing knives. There is another gear set later on which you can consider getting. The Flying Kato set drops from the ninja veteran fight in the dojo. The smithing text is however a rare drop and I find it extremely annoying. Not that the guy you're fighting is hard, he's simply just a dick. It is slightly better than the Fuma ninja gear, but honestly, you won't really need it. The best thing about the set is however a large bonus to an unlimited ninjutsu, which can be really helpful. Weapon wise, go for the Kusarigama, or you can also use the fist weapon, although it is slightly worse in terms of scaling with dexterity. I will say that this build feels extremely cheesy to play. If you want a more fun but still kick-ass build, you can mix in the poison build as well. Since you can get all of the plus melee damage against poisoned enemy stats on your accessories along with ninjutsu power and unlimited ninjutsu, you can add this in and focus on staying in melee combat and back up with the throwing weapons. This is also great if you don't want to farm for gear with unlimited ninjutsu, since without it you most likely won't have enough throwing knives for all stages of the game. I recommend going with this option. In my previous playthrough, I did this with the fist weapon. I destroyed the first game cycle without any difficulties. Well, this was it for a short description of some of the early build options in Nioh 2. As I started by saying, you can do many things to optimize the build further by grinding, but if that's not for you, these builds are very quick to get up and running, and I hope it helped you. Good luck with obliterating some yokai.